Mr. Chairman.
Thank the gentleman. Now recognize the gentleman from South Carolina, Mr. Gowdy, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, I want to read a regulation. I would ask all the panelists to pay attention. It's a little tedious, but it's important. If new or unanticipated threats or hazards are discovered by either the government or the contractor, or if existing safeguards have ceased to function, the discoverer shall immediately bring the situation to the attention of the other party. That's a regulation. Mr. Hess, Mr. Giannetta, were there also contractual obligations in this realm between you and the government?
There are.
And they would be what? Similar to that? A notice provision?
I don't have an immediate recollection of the exact text, but it is similarly worded.
Okay. I think it's helpful sometimes to define terms, particularly for those of us that are liberal arts majors and don't deal with this. What is a new or unanticipated threat or hazard? Mr. Hess?
That would be an indication of compromise of a system or a failure of any of the system protections.
Oh, so when Chairman Chaffetz was having a difficult time getting answered to that question because the focus was on the loss of personal information, that's really not what that phrase means. It's just a threat or hazard. It doesn't actually have to be a loss, does it?
Not the way that I would define it.
Me either. What about existing safeguards have ceased to function? What does that mean? Mr. Hess?
Sorry, it's pretty explanatory.
It did strike me as being self-explanatory. It did. Mr. Giannetta, is it self-explanatory to you? Existing safeguards have ceased to function?
Yes.
Now, here's the really tough question, and I'll let both of you weigh in on this one because it is tough. What does the word immediately mean?
Without delay.
Without delay. Mr. Giannetta, is there another meaning that you're familiar with?
I think that's a good definition.
All right. So you had both a contractual obligation with the government and there's a regulatory obligation that if new or unanticipated threats or hazards are discovered by either the government or the contractor, or if existing safeguards have ceased to function, the discoverer shall immediately bring the situation to the attention of the other party. Ms. Archuleta, I had heard this morning about a March 2014 data breach. Did I hear that right?
Yes, sir, you did.
And when did you bring that breach to the attention of either Mr. Hess or Mr. Giannetta? And you are welcome to turn on your microphone or else bring it closer to you.
I would have to get that information back to you. I don't have it in my notes. Perhaps Ms. Seymour would know, but if not, we'd get that information back to you.
Well, do you know if it was immediately?
I would expect that it was immediate.
Well, let's find out. Ms. Seymour, do you know?
No, sir, I don't. But I don't think that I certainly don't think that we immediately notified our contractors of a breach to our network, because at that time we did not have any question as to whether it was affecting them. It was to our network at that time.
Mr. Hess, Mr. Giannetta, is that your understanding that they were under no duty to bring that to your attention? Not all at once. It's your contractual language, and you're looking at the regulation. Do you think you should have been notified because of the March breach?
Absolutely.
Well, why? Because I just heard one person say she didn't know, and another say it was really none of your business. So why should you have been notified, despite the plain language of the regulation and the contractual language? Why do you think it was important that you be notified?
So that we could take appropriate or more appropriate actions to protect data.
Were you notified?
I was not.
Were you notified immediately?
No.
Huh. What do you have to say about that, Ms. Seymour?
I believe that that's accurate, sir.
Well, I'm with you there. I guess my question is why? Why, despite the plain language of the contract and the plain language of the regulation, why did you not immediately notify the contractors?
We worked with DHS and partners and to understand the potential compromise to our system so that we could make proper notifications.
Was DHS one of your contractors?
No, sir.
Well, I didn't think so, which that doesn't really help me understand the regulation because it says contractor. It doesn't say DHS. So why didn't you notify the contractor?
At that time, we were still investigating what had happened in our network
What does the word immediately mean to you?
without undue.
Did you do so?
No, sir, we did not.
Does the regulation say as soon as you figure out what happened or after you talk to DHS? That is not in my version of the regulation. Is it in yours?
I have not read that regulation, sir.
No, you know why you haven't? Because that one doesn't exist. The one that says notify DHS or try to figure it out. The only one that exists says to immediately notify the contractor, and you're telling me you didn't do it, and my question is why?
I can't answer that question.
Who can?
I will take that back and get you.
To whom will you take it?
I believe I would take it back to my staff to see if we have processes in place.
Do you think it's
that we
staff's
can do that.
responsibility to notify the contractor?
We have processes in place for making notifications when we find these.
Who's ultimately responsible for that process? Who failed to meet the contractual and regulatory obligations?
I would have to read that regulation, sir. I'm not familiar with it.
I just read it.
I'd be happy to read it, and I'd like to read the full context of it.
Oh, you think the context is different from what I just read?
I would want to read the context.
How about the contract? Have you read the
that we have.
contract?
I have read most of the parts of the contract, sir.
Well, I can't speak for the chairman, but my guess is that he and the other members would be really interested in who failed to honor both the letter and the spirit of the contractual obligation and the regulatory obligation. With that, I would yield back.
I think the gentleman will now recognize.
The gentleman from Utah is recognized for his 5 minutes.
I assure the chairman I will be punctual. Thank the chairman. To both the ATF and DEA, I can't thank the men and women enough who are on the front lines doing the hard, difficult work through their lives in jeopardy on a regular basis. And I hope you both carry that back, and they know how much people root for them, care for them, and are concerned about them. We also in Congress have to be concerned about the expenditures and making sure that we're giving proper oversight. Mr. Rosenberg, I want to talk about the confidential informant policy. It's been a source of a scathing review by the Inspector General's office, how that's being executed. There was a supplement to that as well. You have a confidential informant policy in place, correct?
Which now meets the Attorney General's guidelines, yes, sir.
And we have been trying in the Oversight and Government Reform Committee, as well as Senator Grassley in the Senate Judiciary Committee, to get a copy of this this policy. Why won't you give it to us?
Well, 2 things, sir. One is I believe we've made it available to you and to Senator Grassley's staff for in-camera review, if I'm not mistaken. In terms of just providing it, that goes back to Department of Justice policy, by which I am constrained.
You testified on June 22nd of 2016. You said to Senator Grassley in a Senate hearing regarding this policy, quote, "It has been finalized. It's been approved by the department. I'm more than happy to provide a copy to this committee and to your staff, sir," end quote. Yet you didn't do that. Who is prohibiting you from giving that copy to Congress? Well, I see a huge difference between an in-camera review and actually providing it to the Congress.
And I respectfully don't see a huge difference. I understand your point. We've made it available for in-camera review.
And that's true, by the way. That's my understanding of it as well. But I just don't understand what you believe Congress has the right to have and not have the right to have. You freely give it to the Inspector General, but you won't give it to the United States Congress.
Well, and while I don't see a big difference, I understand your point. Nevertheless, I am constrained by the Department of Justice.
Who at the Department of Justice is telling you this?
The name of the person? I don't know, sir.
Can you give me that name?
I'll ask the Department of Justice if I can give you that name. I will give you.
No. Come on. That's silly season here.
No, I don't think it's.
I want to know specifically because there's hundreds of thousands of people involved here. I need a name. Can you give that to me by the end of the week?
I will ask.
No, no,
what
no,
I can
no.
provide
I'm
you.
asking you to give me the name of the person who is denying access to this. Here's what I'm forced to do. We have a hearing next door in the Oversight Committee as well with your deputy, both of
Yeah,
your deputies.
yes.
We are issuing a subpoena.
Okay.
And so I see no choice. We've been trying to do this. Senator Grassley's been trying to do this. I've been trying to do this. Department of Justice doesn't get to hide things from the United States Congress. And there is a huge difference between an in-camera review, no notes, people looking over your shoulder. You can't, members of Congress have a very difficult time accessing that information. And if we're going to provide proper access, it seems like we should be able to review this, especially in light of hundreds of millions of dollars over the course of a year going out the door. The Inspector General giving you all a quote-unquote gentleman's C, as he called it, to grade how this is done. We've had massive problems with people misusing money and assets, and so I'm left with no choice. I've issued you a subpoena.
Okay.
We expect you to comply with that subpoena. I wish I didn't have to do that,
No, I understand.
but I want to have a further